So just as a recap of what we've done, we have essentially created the first job. The first job was to go to our CSV file. It was to grab the employee ID, and it was to put that employee ID here in the transform stage. Now, we also put the first name in here as a column, and we also use the surname as a column. So really, we have all three of these columns here in the transform stage. But we only mapped one, which was this one here, the employee ID. And so once we were done with that, we then inserted all of those values into the party table. So that was job 1. Now we're ready to move on to job 2. Job 2 is to bring in the first name and the last name, the first name and the surname, and we want to put that as a column in transform. And then because there's a single column here, so that column is going to match this column here. And separately, we want to look up the party ID from our first job. So that will go in here as well. So we're talking about column 1 and column 2, where the first column is party ID and the second one will be this concatenation. Once we have that, then we can load into party name. And that will be job 2. But we have a problem. How do we look up party ID? That's not quite so immediately obvious. But think about it. I'll give you a second to maybe pause the video and think about it. How do we get the party ID? And the answer is, well, we know that we have these employee ID values. So we can go into the table, look up 14, and the table, I mean the party table. So we can look up 1424, where we look it up here. We look up in the registered number, find 1424, and then once we find it, grab that party ID, and that is how we get the party ID into the transform stage. Now, to do that, we're going to use a specific stage called, probably no surprise, lookup. So now, remember that we had said we have two jobs. Job 1, we just did that. That's this DB2 job. And then our second job here is going to be loading into the party name table. So this has a lot of really good information in it. Let's not completely ditch it. Let's go to File, Save As, and now we can say, since our goal here is party name, why don't we call it party name? I'm going to save as. Be sure that you select jobs when you do that. Click Save. And to make things even more clear, what we had originally called DB2 is a little bit vague now. Probably would be smart to go to DB2 and rename that to what it is we're attempting to load into, which is really party. So now here you might be wondering, how is it that we're going to run job 1, party, and then follow that up by running job 2, or party name? And the way you do that is you go to File, New, and so far we've only really looked at parallel jobs, but what we need to do in this case is click on Jobs, and then go down to something called Sequence Job. And when you click on OK, we'll be able to drag each job onto the canvas as if it were its own stage. So we would start with party, and then although we haven't really finished party name yet, we would then drag this on to the canvas second, and then we can connect them just like we would connect two stages. We'll come back to this idea later, but this is the flow that we are essentially attempting to create. So here we are in party underscore name, and the first most obvious thing we need to do is change the name of this to party underscore name. And then along with that, go to the link here and change that from in party to in party name so that we're consistent. Then we're going to double click on DB2. We need to go down to the table name, and then, not surprisingly, change that to party name here as well. Now, along with that, we are clearly going to have completely different columns, so we need to change this as well. So we'll click here and delete that, and again, no surprise, we're just going to load the table definitions for cffact party name. So I'm just literally typing this in, party underscore name. There we go. Click on OK. That loads in the definition, and again, we do not want to mention party underscore name ID because that's going to be generated automatically. And again, just to verify what we need to remove and what we don't, I'm going to run the same db2 command that we ran before, looking for what is generated and what is not. And again, probably no surprise here, the only thing we need to avoid entering is party name ID. Okay, so I've done that, and now we'll go back to DataStage. And here we have the three things ultimately that we are trying to insert into the database. Now, see if you can spot a problem here. Here it is, party name type ID. So where on earth are we going to get that? So this is really great practice for lookups, because in order for us to get this party name type ID, which you can see is also, no surprise here, is also set as generated, we need to, which is going to link in here, we need to get that value from the table, i.e. we need to look it up. Now, the table, what I mean, obviously this is the table, and this is typical with CFM type tables, is that if you do a select star from that table, you will notice that there are already values in it out of the box. And those values are where, in fact, specifically this value right here, which is that value, is what we need to put in here, party name type ID. And then unsurprisingly, and by put I mean we need to look that up, and then once we have it, again unsurprisingly, we need to store it. And where are we going to store it? Just like we saw before, that is going to go into the transform stage. And this is so important to what we're trying to do that it's really, really handy, I think, to just keep a list, this list right here, of all of the fields that we need from party name, minus this one, because again we're not going to use any that say generated here. We don't want to have that. Have this handy so that we know what we need to build. Specifically, we need to build a transform stage. We need to get to a point in which we have those three fields ready to go so that we can load into our party name table. So in order to get this more realistic example to work properly, we need to modify the schema slightly, our CSV slightly. So what I mean by that is we need to indicate whether or not we have individuals or if we have organizations. And in order to do that, we need to reflect first name needs to change into something like name1 and name2 for a last name. And then separately, rather than say employee ID, we need simply an ID. Now, based on that, we have the ability to go in and make, for example, O relate to a trading name, and I would relate, for example, to a legal name. So now a really obvious question: if we're going to do a lookup, how are we going to do a lookup such that party name type ID can be joined to party name type ID in these two tables, in this table? So the answer is, well, we just looked at it. We need to look at this type, and we need to make an association between that type and what the value here is going to be. And specifically, we need to say that we need to somehow tie or look up I, i.e. transform an I into a 1 and an O into a 5. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use a lookup table, but that value is going to come into our transform stage. Okay, here's my updated CSV file, and this is great because now we can adjust our parameters like we talked about before. And how do we do that? Well, we go up to job properties, we go down to our parameters, we go to the CSV file, and we edit this. So we can just like literally go over here, press F2, and change this so we know the name of this file. It is entities now, and we're ready to go. Okay, now our goal is to modify this section of the canvas, but this is pretty complicated, and what we're trying to do, we really should build up from the ground up. So let's start with something really, really simple. So let's make a new job. We'll call it test. We'll make sure it goes into the jobs folder. And then in test, let's get rid of all of this and do the simplest possible lookup that we could. So we'll go down to the processing group, locate your lookup, which is here, drag it to the stage, make sure it connects. And now, despite what the name lookup may indicate, what it really is doing is actually just joining your tables together. So this is its input. Its output, we're going to make a file, let's say sequential file here, drag it to the stage, connect it. Now, and then we're going to need a reference table. And to do that, we'll go to the database group, go down to DB2 connector, and we want our connector to be to look up data from the party table. So I'm going to double click on the party connector. We're going to go to the instance and really just exactly like we did before. So I've entered my values, and you'll notice something strange. Where is our SQL information? This is a really common thing if you forget to drag a link to some other stage. You're not going to see all of what you need. And so once I do that, now we can see SQL information and we can see the columns tab, neither of which were here before. And what we're going to do in this case is we're going to not generate the SQL, or I should say we are going to have DataStage do the SQL generation for us. And like before, we're going to say, well, we want the table to be CF fact party, and that is got its own set of table definitions which we need to bring in. So this is exactly what we've done in the past. We're going to go here, CF fact party, bring all of these in, click OK, and like I said before, the name lookup, it's not like you're issuing a SQL statement, grabbing a value and returning it. What you're really doing is joining everything that was in, or at least a few columns that you want, that was in your CSV to whatever you have in DB2 or whatever your reference is here. And then the output is going to be everything of this plus everything of that after the lookup, and it will go into this stage. And then just to drive home this point, look at the link type we have here. Let me expand this or move this over a bit. This dashed line here you might not recognize. So again, if you're not sure what it is, right click and it'll say convert to stream, so it's not stream. Convert to reject, so it's not reject. There's only one other type left, and that is reference. So if you're ever curious, this is how lookups work. It has an input from the left, and that is a stream. It has an output on the right. That is also a stream. You can confirm that here. And then it has a reference, and it can have multiple references really to look up data on the top. Now at this point, I've just renamed some things to make it a little more obvious what's happening. Nothing new. And now let's go into add party ID, which is our lookup stage. And notice how this is very similar to what we saw in Transformer. And what we need to do here is find the value that we can join the CSV against the party on and get what we need back out. And here we've run into the first problem. These are clearly the wrong column names. And so what we need to do is update our table definition. So to do that, again, nothing fancy here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go import table definition. This comes from a sequential file definition. We're going to locate the directory, which is here, same as before. We're going to look at all the CSV files, find our new file. Notice the second problem, which is we have entities.txt. We're looking for CSVs. We don't see it, so we have to rename this. I'll do that now. So file, rename, and we're going to make this entities.csv. Okay, now go back. Same thing as before, sequential file. And now we have entities CSV. We're going to import, and in the first line is the column name. The rest of this looks pretty good. And notice too that we really should be accurate here by saying that our ID really is our primary key, and just we're verifying that everything else looks good here. Click OK and close and update our CSV so that we have the right columns. Same thing we've been doing from before. There we go. And then let's rename in Transformer, because now we have in Transformer and in, that doesn't make any sense. So let's make that CSV, and we have in lookup. They're both going into lookup. That isn't very clear, so let's make that party. And now when we open our lookup stage, things are starting to make a lot more sense. What may not be as obvious or make as much sense is that take a look at our party table. Its primary key is party_ID, and then our CSV's primary key is ID. Now, this doesn't say primary key, it says key, and this is not necessarily the primary key. This is the key value that you're going to use to join the two tables together. And you can see that in an example here. If I don't want that to be my primary key, I want my registered number to be the primary key, because remember, this is a surrogate key, and registered number is actually the unique key. It's our minimal super key that we want to be joining with our CSV file. So these two are now selected, these two are checked, and here's what we want to do. We want to join these. I'm going to drag this over to where it says key expression under registered number. And that just created an inner join. Now the question is, well, what do we want to see on our output link? And the answer to this is actually really nice. You can just simply drag whatever you want right here, and say you wanted the timestamp or registered number and so on. Now let's say that's not what you want, because it's actually not what we want. You can select all those, delete the column, get rid of all of those. And let's say you wanted the entire table. You can just drag like this, you get the whole table. And if you wanted the party table, same thing, drag the whole thing over. And of course that's not really what we want either, so I'm going to press Control A and then right click and delete this. So what is it that we want? Well, in my mind, I think we want everything from the CSV, plus the whole point of doing this party table lookup was to get this party ID. So let's bring that over, and now let's click on OK. Okay, so let's say that we tried to compile this. We're going to get an error. See if you can figure out which one we'll get. And the first one is easy. Remember, we previously had a reject link. We don't now. So let's go ahead and make one that does. It's always a good idea. So we'll go down, and I won't bore you with this part. Okay, so that's done. Done exactly the same way as we've been doing in the past. Let's try recompiling that. Okay, no errors, so let's run that. Okay, and we get an error. So this is fairly common. One thing we didn't do was create a regex for our lookup, and if we want to find out exactly where was our error at, go to the director, and you need to first click on jobs, then click on the specific job, then click on log over here. And once you've done that, you can narrow this down. And essentially what it said here was there was a failed a key lookup for record 3. Not surprising, right? We have an intentional error in our source data. So we need to adjust for that. We need to compensate and be on the lookout for errors. So let's create another regex file. Okay, I've gone ahead and created regex2. Now how do you use it? You go into add party ID, then go up here to constraints. A constraint is applied to the entire table. So if we had some condition where you could select any of these, we'll talk more about these later, but say you said I have a particular value. If there's some value, then and you make some condition. If it doesn't meet that condition, then you can say I want to fail the whole thing, or I want it to reject, and it would go down the reject link. That's for the whole link, the whole table, but in our case we just want to do a particular lookup. So if we have a lookup that fails like we did here, we want to send that out the reject link and to go into regex2. Okay, so let's now run that, and we'll compile it as well. Okay, very nice. You can see on the director, control finished the job. Now let's go look at both out1 and also look at regex. So here's out1, and looks good, right? And notice that we have our ID plus our type, which is really what we were looking for, and we have party ID, which is another thing we were looking for. And then separately, let's go look at regex2, and sure enough, there is our regex2. And you might be wondering, okay, why is this in the regex2? Well, remember that although I had said earlier that we had an intentional error in our CSV, we do, but that came into this regex. So why did this reject fail? Well, think about it, 3135, where is that in the database? If I run this, we're clearly not seeing our new value listed in there. 3135 is not here, and therefore designer was exactly right to reject it. Also, if you're wondering why party ID is double quoted even though it's an integer, and the ID is not quoted and it's an integer, the answer is in the lookup stage, where you can see for the table definition for ID we see an integer of 10, whereas in out we see party ID big int, which is a DB2 thing, for 8, and the quoting comes in because of our out stage, where we see under format field defaults for quote set to double. So if you have a variable length field, you're going to see this double quoting around it, and apparently DB2's big int qualifies as a variable length field. So here we have a lot of really good logic, but it would be great if we could abstract this out and just sort of reuse these three components, because this diagram is starting to get a little bit unwieldy. So here is a simple, nice way to do that. If we drag out a rectangle here, we'll get these three stages. Now if we go to edit and then go down to construct container and local, and then click on yes to create a container from that, we have now a new tab on the lower right corner that encapsulates all of that logic into this single container. And now what we can do is grab that container, copy it, and we can use that in our original second job. So if I switch over to party name and paste, there is our container, and now we can double click on it and see the input and its output and essentially all the work we had done before. So here I just rearranged things to make that a little easier to read, but notice that input is not inside the container and output is also not inside the container. Those are just references that use the same names, we're going to see this later, as whatever comes here. So this is out and that is in, like we were expecting, like CSV in fact. So again, CSV, we see it here, and then there's that same link here. So in this case, what we want to do is grab this link and make sure it connects to our CSV. We're going to get an error though, because we obviously currently have a link, so we're going to delete that. And this is a stream link because it's solid, so just so you're aware. But now our CSV is going to input into the container, and then our output can go to some other stage like transformer, for example. And just notice how much cleaner that is. We can move this over, we can rename it, we can say add party ID, and it's just much more clear what's going on graphically here. And if you need all the detail, that's no problem. You can still get in there, double click, and there's all that complexity hidden. Now remember what it is we're trying to accomplish here. We need to take anything that says type I and map that to a 1. And similarly, anything that says an O in our CSV, we need to map that to a 5. We're doing that so that these IDs will map correctly here. So to accomplish that, what do we need to do? We need to convert, i.e. transform, an I into a 1, and we need to transform an O into a 5. So that is exactly what we're going to do in the transform stage. Okay, so since I'm running a kind of experiment, I don't want to mess up my party name project, my party name job. So what I'm going to do is click on File, Save As, and I know this is a kind of test, so I'm going to say, I need to derive a type, and let's save a new job like that, so we don't have test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which don't mean anything. And now we can attempt to do this conversion. Let's go into the transformer, and I'll line the window up here. And what we need to do is create a new column, a column we haven't seen yet, that can handle this new data. Okay, so to create that new column, right click here, click on Append a New Column, and that gives me a new row down here. And I'm going to make a derived type ID. I know it's a big int, I know it's 8. How do I know that? Because if I do a describe on party on that table, I'm going to see party name type ID is big int 8. So that's great. And now we need to do an actual derivation. Okay, now I'm going to show you the simplest type of derivation you could possibly make. We know this is a big int. Let's say that I just type in the number 9 here randomly, and then I enter OK. what this is going to do, well, what is this going to do? Let's check. So I'm going to remove party because we're still in our type sort of thing. We're doing a test here, and I want to put a sequential file out here. I'll just set that up. Okay, I've gone ahead and created out2 for a link, and the name for the file is also out2. You might be wondering, why out2? It's because here we have out, but we're not supposed to use the name of a parameter set, so let's call it out1. And now let's go back. This link needs to match that one, so this has to say out1 as well. And now we can try compiling it. That works, so I'm going to click on run. Okay, that ran just fine. Now look at the output here. Derived TID, you can see it's a 9. It's exactly that 9 that I put in the derivation. So that was just to give you an idea of how derivations work. In this case, we need something more complicated, and in fact, we need an IfThen. Okay, so how do you do an IfThen? Well, click on the ellipsis here, go down to IfThen else, and now we need an if against something, so click again on the ellipsis, go down to input column, and here we want to know where the type, so click that, and it says if out1.type equals, and then we're going to do quotes I quotes, and then we're going to say, well, if that's the case, if there's an I, then we know the value is going to be 1. Otherwise, we're going to say 5, and in our case this makes sense. In our CSV file this makes sense. You may need some more complicated logic in yours. Okay, and then make sure we don't get any errors. Click on OK and rerun that. And now let's update our file, meaning, just click on Notepad++, that updates. Now notice we don't have any 5s in here at all. And that's not really surprising. Remember that when we did our first job, we never inserted my company. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's go to DB2. Here's a describe of the party table. Let's manually insert into party registered number values, and let's put in 3135 and press enter. Notice that DB2 requires, we get another error if we don't, it requires the schema name first. Hit enter, we get the new entry. So let's rerun. Notice now we have 5 rows. Let's click in Notepad++. There's our new entry, and there's our 5. And why did we get a 5? Because remember, go back to entities, and you'll notice that we have O listed here. Now remember that the point of this is to build up as many columns as we need in the transform part of this project, of this job. But if you look at the transform stage, and actually if you compare that against here, we really only have 2 columns, and that's not necessarily what we want. So what I would suggest we do is grab all of these except the ID, because ID is already under registered number. So let's grab everything else and put that alongside what we've already got, and let's recompile. Okay, let's click on Notepad++, and there we go. And we'll restore this window so you can see more of what's going on here. Okay, now we're getting awfully close to what we want. Remember that we're trying to get into party name all the columns that party name needs. So that means party name ID, which we're going to ignore because it's generated. And then we need party ID. Do we have party ID? Yes, we do. Now what about party name type ID? Yes, we do. We derived it in the transformer stage. Derived type ID. What about text? Not quite. We have name1 and we have name2. So now we need to get our single column. And then separately to simplify things, why don't we put this in the right order and reduce the number of columns so that it matches exactly what we're about to insert into the database. Okay, so I'm going to move this diagram over so we have it as reference. Let's go back into Transformer and let's get things lined up. Okay, let's start with what we're completely missing, and that is this new text column. So let's right click here, append a new column, and then define it down here. Okay, so I've made a new column called derived_text. It's varchar Unicode 200. How do I know that? Go to DB2, you can describe it, or you can look at your table definitions. Here's text, varchar 200, that matches. And now we need to do a concatenation, so double click to get in here, and we're going to click the ellipsis, go to input column, go to name1, and then concatenation is just a space, and then a colon, and then a space. So that's what we're going to do here. Input column, we need name2, And just in case there are leading spaces, we're going to do a trim on both sides. How do you know that you can do a trim like that? Because if you click on the ellipsis, you can go to the function and go down to string, and then go all the way down to trim, which is here, and there you go. And this is trying to give you the syntax, but we know it's actually just between parentheses, so I'm going to go like this and go like that and put the parenthesis at the end, and that is a trimmed version of a concatenation between name1 and name2. Also, when you use the ellipsis, the location where your cursor is pointing will be context sensitive. So like if I click on the ellipsis because I'm in this position, then the ellipsis will show me things that make sense at that position of the cursor. In any case, this looks good, and we're not getting any errors, so I'm going to click OK, and let's recompile it. Okay, that ran. Let's go back to Notepad++ and look at our out2, and take a look. We're getting close, right? We have Linda Johnson, but they're all mashed together, which we don't want. Okay, no problem. Go into Transformer and go down here, change this just slightly, because what we're missing here is the space. So let's do a quotation space quotation and another concatenation after that. So we will insert the space in that location. No error messages, that's good. But the next step is we need to get our transformation or transformer columns lined up so that they match what we're attempting to do, which is to load into that table. So let's put them in the right order. Again, party name ID, we're not going to mention it. Party ID, do we have it? Yes, here it is. Let's put that first. Now, party name type ID. Yes, we do have it. Derived it. We derived that earlier, so let's put that next. How about text? Yes, we do. We derived that too, so let's put that in the third position. These other ones, we don't need it for our load, so let's select them and delete it and select yes to all, click OK, and run that. Okay, that ran. We have 5 rows, and let's go into Notepad++, and now let's compare these side by side. So we needed party ID, there it is. It's in the first position, second position really, according to this. Then we need party name type ID, there it is. That's the derived type ID, and we need the text, and there it is. So now we are in a good position to do the load. Now remember that we are in a test job, right? It's called derived type. So what we can do is select transformer, which is really the only major thing that we've changed. Now go back to party name, take this transformer out of the picture by hitting delete, and now paste, and now look, we have the transformer. We just need to get these links adjusted. So you might be wondering, okay, which links do we keep, which ones do we get rid of? Remember, we did a bunch of work about which columns come in and which ones go out. So we haven't done that sort of work on these links, so let's take those out of the picture. And now let's put these links into the picture. Okay, so I literally just moved the links around so that they connected everything. Now, we're going to have some issues. If I double click on transformer, we have this. Why? Look at out1. Where is out1? Well, it's here. Now, why would that not work? Because the output here is still listed as out, so we need to rename that to out1. Now, let's go back to party name, go back to transformer, and there we go. And our mappings are in place. So we can click OK. Okay, next we have party and not party name, so that doesn't make any sense. This needs to go into party name. So let's rename that to party name. Out2 is fine if you want to keep it there, that's okay. And now we need to go to table name, and that needs to say party name. The next thing is, we're saying insert, but that's not actually what we want to do. What we really want to do is a merge. So if you click on update then insert, what's going to happen here is if these rows over here aren't already in the database, they'll be inserted. Otherwise they will be updated. So here's a quick review of that merge. If you need more information, see the previous video on merge in the same series. So just think about, this is really great. I mean, we're talking about doing a merge without writing any SQL, and the merge is obviously really long. So what we should at some point do is go back to our first job, the one that said party, and change it to update then insert, and we'll be merging there as well. For now though, we're just going to click on OK, and we have party name, and let's just double check that the columns look reasonable. They do. And now let's go on and let's run it. Okay, I tried to run that. I got an error. That's because we haven't changed the parameters for CSV, but let's do that now. Click on OK, run it again. Okay, still that didn't work, so why would that be? Well, there's one last step we did not do, and something you should always be checking for, which is to look at your columns. These are not the columns in the database. I mean, you can see it right here. They're not here. So this is a mistake because we were trying to output previously directly to the sequential file, and we weren't using the correct table definitions. So that was what I meant earlier about the links. When we deleted them, we technically could have left the other link. But I think you see the point here, which is that we need the right table definitions for party name. Okay, now when we do that, we are going to need to change transformer as well, because look, now we have all of these things that don't work. But not a big deal. I just copied and pasted what this looked like in our other job so that we can set this up correctly here, quickly and easily. First things first, drag party ID onto party ID. Great, easy enough. Then enter this as it was before. Okay, very good. That only took like 30 seconds. I just typed this in. And now remember, this is the generated column. I keep saying this, but it's a generated column. We do not want it. So we're going to delete that. Click OK and finish up here, and now recompile it. Okay, great. 5 rows out, no error messages. Now just keep in mind, John Smith, that was 1424 for his ID. And let's go to DB2 and see what we get. We were in party name, sure enough, 5 records. And what do we see? Names separated by spaces, just like we wanted, in a single column. If we look at John Smith, we see that his party ID is 5849. If we now do a select star from party, what do we get? We see a party ID of 5849 that corresponds to 1424, just like we expected. And really, that makes sense, right? We have 1424 was his ID. That matched up to registered number. That allowed us to do an insert, which gave us a party ID. That party ID was then placed here, which we looked up. And again, that party ID is exactly this party ID, John Smith 5849. And this makes sense too, because we were able to concatenate the names and put them here in text, and then we were able to derive this type based on this list, and which later became party name type ID. And you can see all of that happening right here in party name, especially under party name type ID. There's the 1, there's the 5 that we saw earlier in our Notepad++. The O's became 5s, the I's became 1s, and sure enough, it worked. Now, one quick correction. I've changed this to regex3 and regex3 here because if you go into our container, we have regex2 and we don't want a name clash here. And along the same lines, if you go to regex3 and you go to formats and you go to field defaults, I've been typing in double quotes, null, double quotes, but you don't need to do that. You can save yourself time by just typing in null in all those cases. So I know this video was longer than the other ones, but if you're still with me, then congratulations. This was actually a pretty complicated example, right? You're talking about bringing in a CSV file. You are dealing with any oddball scenarios with this regex file. You have set up a container. Inside the container, you've got a lookup. You've got multiple pieces happening inside the container. Then you take its output, send it off to a transformer, handle its regex through here, and then finally load it. So you have done the entire ETL process. You've got your extracting, your transforming, your lookup and your transform really, and then your load into the database. So if this makes sense, you essentially have the tools that you need to handle just about any ICFM ETL task that someone might give you.